All right, Andy, we're recording. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to call the Finance Committee meeting of June 21st, 2022 to order at 4 minutes after 3 o'clock. And welcome everyone. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, extended by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting can do so via Zoom or telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public is being permitted, but every effort is being made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. So what I want to do next is welcome the members of the committee and then make sure that each member of the committee can hear and be heard. I understand that other members of the AHRA are possibly in the audience, and I'll explain what the process will be when we get to that agenda item. But we're going to be starting with the Community Preservation Act proposal, so I'll just proceed on that basis. Therefore, I want to turn to the recognition of members of the committee to make sure that you can hear us, hear me, and we can hear you. And again, I'll just go in alphabetical order. Lynn?
Present.
Bob?
Present.
Matt?
Present.
Bernie Kubiak is absent, so we will note that for the minutes. He could not join us today. Michelle?
Present.
Kathy?
Here.
And I think that we're still waiting for Alicia to join us. When she does, we'll confirm that she's fully connected technologically to the meeting and can proceed from there. The agenda today will go into, I'm going to go into several times separately because we'll talk a little bit more about the reparations discussion when we get to it. There will be public comment, and there may be public comment, I think, at a couple of different times. It says on the printed agenda, North Common action as required. All action was taken at the last meeting. There is no action that is required, so there will be no discussion of the North Common. There is a proposed order regarding funding for that. There is a forum before the next council meeting. Lynn may share in a second for the public what the plan is for the council meeting and the forum, but that is the time that public is encouraged to participate if they are interested in that particular item. We will then be going to the Community Preservation Act, therefore, is our next substantial item, and then the reparations discussion. So that is the agenda for today's meeting. And Lynn, did you have anything else you wanted to say about the North Common that I haven't already said?
The forum for the North Common is at 6:30 on Monday, June 27th. And Athena, correct me if I'm wrong, the public forum on the Community Preservation Act, I believe you now said cannot happen until the 18th. Is that correct?
The vote can't happen until July 18th because the order hasn't been posted yet. I'm waiting for a final version and then we can post it. So it's up to you if you want to hold the public forum.
Well,
I
maybe
think it's too late to
it's
hold the
different
public
from the
forum
back end
this
of
coming Monday.
CIS
So we should
info
hold the
because
public
I
forum on
definitely
July
pulled some
18th.
of
Yes,
that
you're right.
guidance.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so but for the North Common, do know that the order has been published, and will be considered at the council meeting on Monday of next week, and the forum will be also on the same date, and there's no discussion needed in today's meeting. So with that, I would like to introduce and welcome Sarah Marshall, who's chair of the Community Preservation Act Committee, and she can then proceed to tell us about the recommendation of the committee, and we'll proceed from there.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm happy to be with you and tell you about our final recommendation to you. I should note that my service on the committee ends at the end of this month. So if you need someone from CPAC in July, Sonia will find the right person for you. So perhaps I can just read our decision to you, and then give you a little bit of history and explain how we got to our decision, which was earlier this month. So we are the CPA committee is recommending a borrowing authorization of $800,000 for the Amherst Pelham Regional High School District to pursue track replacement option 3 as presented to CPAC during its meeting of June 2nd. If other planned funding does not reach the option 3 target and the track cannot be reoriented, the borrowing of CPAC funds will be rescinded. I should note, should have been put here in the report, that the CPAC vote was unanimous, 8-0. We have 1 vacancy at the moment. Usually there should be 9 members, but there are only 8, and it was a unanimous vote. All right, so why did we act on this in June? The school district had submitted a proposal that last fall in the usual application cycle for the same amount of money, $800,000, to resurface the track in its current location. And in discussion with Doug Slaughter, who represented the school administration, the committee expressed its unhappiness or concern about how the proposal to resurface the track in its current location was inconsistent with the plan in the master plan for the athletic fields that had been developed a few years ago. That master plan envisioned rotating the track 90 degrees and installing a synthetic turf field in the interior. This reorientation would allow then other athletic fields at the high school to be reoriented, rebuilt, otherwise laid out in a much more sensible and useful manner. And in fact, 2 years ago, I think, the school district had asked CPAC for a relatively small amount of money, maybe $150,000 or so, to begin the design work on doing that reorientation. So last fall, when the school committee or school district then was proposing to not reorient it, we were concerned about that. And we wanted more information. We wanted some explanation of why that was being pursued rather than the original plan to reorient the track. I should say that no one was in any doubt whatsoever that the current track is in deplorable shape and very much needs to be rebuilt. So that was not the question. We also wanted some more information about the cost, since there was no real budget backup provided at the time. So in any case, we had that discussion with Mr. Slaughter, and then we proceeded to discuss all the other projects, make our recommendations to council, and we deferred action on this track proposal. pending new information. And that information was provided to us earlier this month. It's my understanding that council already has reviewed that information from the regional school committee, which involves their funding plan for building that reoriented track and redeveloped fields. That's what is now called option 3. And that council authorized the borrowing of Amherst's contribution to some of the capital spending that the regional school school committee wanted to do. So, excuse me, so they already had secured part of the funding for this option 3. The CPAC money would be another big chunk of the funding to enable them to get to option 3. They will also be going to the other regional towns, asking them to contribute in various ways. And there's going to be a significant fundraising effort undertaken by the Amherst Hurricane Boosters. And we definitely hope that will succeed. But their fallback plan, if they do not secure enough funding to make the school committee secure or make them feel confident that they can proceed with this option 3, their fallback position is simply to rebuild the track in its current location. And we've been assured that the borrowing of $1.5 million that the school committee has already gotten, thanks to council's action, if I understand this all right, that is sufficient to rebuild the track in its place. Which means that the CPA money is only needed and will only be awarded if they can pursue the larger project. And the committee all felt very good about that and very enthusiastic, and certainly wants to enable them to undertake a robust fundraising effort by showing that we support that option 3 rebuilding plan. So I'll leave that there for now and ask if you have any questions.
Okay, well, thank you. And I will turn to the committee as Lynn.
First of all, I want to thank CPA for taking this out of cycle. The town council did vote an amount in the past, and it was, though not unanimous, it was our clear indication of support for this. And if it is acceptable to the chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Do you want to hold off on motion, or it's up to you?
Now I'll be glad to hold off.
I just want to see if there are other, since there are 2 other hands up. Kathy?
I'm fine also with Lynn making a motion. So I just wanted to expand on something Sarah said, and I double checked, it's in the title. There was really a robust, I'm a liaison to CPAC, and it's a fantastic committee. And we're sad to be losing you, Sarah. You've been a wonderful chair. But one of the discussions was the larger project, option 3 is track and field. And I see that the order has in it track and field, because that was an important distinction for the committee, that we were getting everything you just described with this additional funds. If the fundraising goes through, we're not just getting a track, we're also getting fields that are more broadly used. So I did double check the way the financial order is written. It has that word track and field, which I know was in the discussion. There was actually an emphasis on making sure the word field appeared because of the extent to which this will make multiple things happen, and why it had such strong support. So it's a comment rather than a question.
I should have slipped the word field in to that.
Michelle?
Sarah, do you know if any of the other CPA committees have taken this up yet in the other towns, or is Amherst first?
I'm sorry. I don't believe they have, because they just had their spring meetings, I believe, before this proposal was available to them. I'm not entirely sure. Probably Sean. Yeah, Sean knows. Maybe they'll have fall meetings.
Well, I think Sarah's right in terms of a new request. I don't think any of the other towns have taken it up, but one of the other towns, I want to say Pelham, awarded some funds already towards this. So Amherst has already awarded some funds towards this for design work. And so this request is for the additional amount that's needed. And one of the other towns have done that already as well.
Great.
But the point, I guess, Michelle, is since you're not attuned to the town meeting possibly as other the schedule, but there's just annual Springtown meetings, and then everything else is done as special town meetings, so that they would have to have a series of to get it done on time. They would have to have a recommendation from their CPA committee. Their select board would have to decide to call a special town meeting and publish a warrant before there would be an actual process to get final approval. We have the advantage of a year on government now. So with that, I'm going to stop for just one moment to see if there are any members of the who are attendees at the meeting who would like to speak on the CPA issue. This is only about CPA. I do not want to get any public comment on other issues, but I certainly would welcome any public comment about this particular matter. So seeing that no hands have gone up, Sarah, I'm back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say for the record, even though it's here in the special report, that we are all aware that the CPA statute forbids the use of CPA funds for constructing artificial turf fields. But we have seen the budget breakdown for this that Weston and Sampson did this spring for the full project 3. And there is plenty of ways to spend $800,000 or more of CPA money without without getting into trouble around an artificial turf field. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you for adding that. So Sean or Sonia, do we have the order available, or?
It's up on the screen.
And now that it's up and people have a chance to look at it, I'll go back to Lynn, because you would have been prepared to make a motion. And
Yep. I move that the Finance Committee recommend to the Town Council adoption of appropriation and borrowing authorization order FY23-08A, Town of Amherst Community Preservation Act, an order appropriating and authorizing debt for the rehabilitation improvements of the Amherst Regional High School track and field under open space/recreation.
Jane seconds.
okay, so we've been a motion on the floor now that has been made and seconded. Sarah and Bob in that order. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. So it's CPA's recommendation that this borrowing be contingent on moving forward with that option 3. Is there any need to make that clear in this order?
That's a Sean question.
That it's for reorienting the track, not for rebuilding it in place.
So I think, I mean, we could always clarify it with that. I don't think it needs that clarification because it's very clear in the report what the authorization is for that sort of accompanies it. And I know, Sonia, will the report be sort of part of this order, sort of like the memo goes along with the order in terms of describing it?
Oh, we can add it
Okay.
to this, to page 2, but it doesn't need to be in the order. It's very clear in the report.
So I think I would say no, because we haven't done that with other things. We'll attach the report so that it's clear what the intent of the CPA committee was.
Just very quickly, Athena, can you bring Alicia in from the audience?
Is on our way. Sean or Sonia, should the order say of supporting historic preservation, or should it say open space recreation?
Oh, does it say historic
In the
preservation?
now therefore be it ordered, it says fund a grant for the purpose of supporting historic preservation.
Yes, that should be changed.
Okay.
It's the paragraph down below that's the
Yeah,
problem.
down below. Yep. No, good catch, Athena.
So it should say supporting open space and recreation
Yep.
rather than historic. Yeah.
Mhm.
Got it.
Okay, Alicia's here. Can we just confirm that she can hear and be heard?
Yes, I was going to do that. Alicia, welcome. But can you confirm that you can hear me and that we can hear you, so we can confirm your?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I can hear you all.
Okay, so minutes will show that we've confirmed. Thank you very much. We are started the meeting by recognizing no action is required, no further action is required in the North Common, and move to the next agenda item, which is Community Preservation Act, and that's where we are right now. Sarah's spoken on this committee recommendation. So
Bob has his hand up, Andy.
yeah, I see that. I just finishing out the question. Did you change the order slightly?
I didn't change it. I highlighted where it needs to be changed.
Okay. But you want to make sure that your motion notes the proposed amendment that
So-
we're making.
As amended.
And Kathy, you're in agreement as the second?
Yes, I second.
Okay. Bob,
I just wanted to also add, or in that, maybe we should take out the wording "and field" under the high school track and field, since this money is specifically for the track and not for the field.
That's,
So the CPA committee was very adamant that we include field in the description of the project. I think you're right, Bob. I think actually at the CPA committee, I sort of we had that conversation because CPA track is really the only portion that's CPA eligible, or the associated cost of the track. But I think in terms of describing the project, the CPA committee wanted it to be really clear that the project is a track and field project and not just a track project. But you're right in terms of
that in the project description, but in the order, I think it ought to be clean and just talk about the track.
Mhm.
That's all. That's just my suggestion.
Sarah?
Oops, just trying to put my hand down. I believe that option 3 will make additional improvements. It's not just the track and its interior artificial field, which CPA money cannot be used for. There are like relocating and changing, I forget what you call them, the places for long jumping and high jumping, all the track and field events. So I guess I don't want this to be so limiting that the CPA funds could only be used literally for the track.
And to Sarah's point, there's also some costs associated with repairing the fields where the track used to be. And that may be CPA eligible as well, to restore those fields back to, sort of grass or something like it.
Right. There may be eligible items besides the track that are still compliant with with CPA.
Well, maybe we could just put some language in there, what to just say eligible items or something of this project. I just think we are the order ought to be as clear as possible as to what the money could be used for.
I was thinking the same thing as you. After the words fund a grant for the purpose of supporting, and then after the word supporting Community Preservation Act eligible portions of somewhere to get it in there.
Andy, can I say something?
Yes.
We won't put any expenditures through that aren't eligible for CPA. So if invoice comes through and it's not an eligible request, that will not be paid through CPA. So we keep an eye on this stuff in the finance department. It doesn't really need to be in the order.
So if the maker and seconder of the motion are comfortable with where it's at, then I think it's no need to make that addition.
I'm comfortable.
So am I. And I
Okay.
actually think this is pretty clear, given what is being described. I mean, it's called Project 3 or whatever, option 3. It is much bigger than the track, which is why we may or may not get it in time for January. Yeah.
So with that, is there any other comments from the committee? Otherwise, I think we are ready to, and it is the motion as amended, which had to do with a slight change to the wording of the order that arose from the discussion. So that is the motion on the floor. Matt?
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Sarah, and everybody for this. If my connection breaks up, I apologize. I was wondering, Sean, if or somebody could give us a quick update on where this puts us towards the total request for the project, where this will get us to in terms of the fundraising goal.
Yeah, is that okay, Andy, if I respond to
Yes.
that?
Please.
So the 1.5 million has been authorized. The total project cost was about 4.7 million. So we've got 1.5 in place. CPA authorized about 150,000, maybe a little bit more last year, 2 years ago. And then this would be another 800,000. So this is sort of back of the envelope, but this I think would get us to about 2.4, 2.5 total. Now, if you're talking about the goal that the school committee set, I believe, a goal of 2.2 million in addition to the 1.5 that was already approved. So we still have a ways to go to get to that 2.2 million with this 800,000, if this 800,000 is approved. But in total, we're about 2.4, 2.5 million.
Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I would just note that, Amherst certainly hopes that Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham will also step up and contribute more money. So
Yes,
it's
it was
not,
my
it's not
understanding.
entirely, I'm sorry.
It was my understanding that the reason for wanting the CPA recommendations early is to give confidence for the fundraising effort that is being commenced by others, including the Boosters Club, and that was the purpose. Matt, do you have further comments or questions or response?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, because your hand was still up. Kathy, your hand is up.
Just following up on Matt's, when we do this at the council, Lynn, and when we send it forward from finance, I think that chart that shows the 4.7 and where this sits would be good so that we have a context. You know, so there's a final chart that adds up to the 4.7 and shows the pieces of it. I just think it would be good that people understand this is still contingent funding, without putting the wording in here. That's just, it's got nothing to do with my support for this. I just think that context will be important on when it's part of the hearing.
Yeah, we could easily put together a chart that we can update regularly for the council, if that's helpful. We could shape it like one of those thermostats where it fills up as the fundraising goes up, or maybe, maybe a field goal post or something. I'm trying to think of what would be relevant to a track, but.
And I think including the town manager's report on a regular basis would be good. Okay.
Alicia? You're muted.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Andy. I didn't mean to raise my hand, but thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the motion on the floor? Otherwise, I'll call for a vote. Now, assuming that Alicia's hand is not up for discussion purposes and that I can move forward with the vote, and I'll just go alphabetically with the usual that resident members are indicating whether there's support, and that will be reflected in the report to the council and in the minutes. So going alphabetically again, Lynn.
Approve.
That's a yes. Hegner, Bob.
Support.
Matt. Matt, we're not hearing. So I don't know if you're
Support.
Okay, thank you. Bernie Kubiak is absent. Michelle,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes,
I'm a yes, and Alicia.
Yes.
Okay, so it's unanimous 5-0 with the 2 resident members who are present at the meeting indicating support, 1 resident member being absent. So Sarah, thank you very much. I too am very sorry that you're leaving the CPA committee. It has done some really great things under your leadership, and you will be sorely missed.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, and I'm so glad you all support this this proposal. Just before I go, am I right to conclude you do not need CPAC representation at your council meeting next week?
Lynn, that's a
If you
question
don't
to
have,
I don't think so. I think as long as Sean and or Sonia are there, we're fine.
no, maybe I misunderstood. I thought if you can't have the hearing until, if you're not going to act until July.
Right. I still think we're fine. I mean, this is not, it's, if we had never discussed this and discussed that this was coming, I would feel quite differently, but the order is quite clear and I think we're fine, and it's summertime.
Okay. All right, because I could be there if you need me to. So,
Thank you.
all right. Well, thank you.
Okay, so turn this to reparations and just say a couple things really quickly at the beginning. And in a moment, we're going to bring members of the AHRA, in addition to our 1 member who's also a member of our committee, who's already here, into the room. This is a discussion, excuse me, I'm going to have to get rid of. This is a discussion of the Finance Committee. I know that the AHRA has had several discussions of this issue, and it's now time for the Finance Committee to have a discussion. But if we were meeting in the town room, then others would be sitting in the town room with us. And we would, when there's an interested group present during a committee discussion or a council discussion, it's not that everybody's there as a participant in the full sense, but everybody's there in the room. And I therefore unless there's feeling otherwise from the Finance Committee, would welcome us bringing the members of the AHRA into the room in that same spirit that we would have if this was an in-person meeting. So seeing no objection, I would say that Athena can go ahead and do that as I go into the other piece. What my suggestion is for the process of this meeting is that we next need to focus on a very important question, which is what information do we need to have fully developed for us to make a recommendation? And is there missing information? Is it available now, or do we need to get some direction to obtain that information? So it's really an identification of information first, this type of discussion. But in order to do that, I think we have to have some idea of what it is that is being proposed. And therefore, I know that Michelle has presented a sort of different and clear explanation of what it is that is the AHRA request. And so I would propose that we begin by asking Michelle to present that to us. I think that she has emailed it to everybody on the committee already, so that it's there. But it would be helpful, I think, if there's no disagreement with this, to have Michelle make that presentation, and she has the option to show it on the screen as a shared screen or not as she does that. And then that will enable us to get into the discussion that I suggested, is that do we have the information that we need in order to take action on this item, or do we need to, is there information that needs to be obtained? Does that sound like a workable plan to go forward? Look for hands to see if there's not. And Michelle, are you comfortable to make that presentation?
Yes, I am, Andy, and I'm just wondering if we could bring in Hala and Dr. Shabazz.
Yes, I've sent them both requests to come in as panelists. They just have to accept the request. So
I see.
yeah, I've sent
Okay.
them to everyone.
Excellent. And with that in mind, I think I should call a meeting of the AHRA to order, given we have a quorum present, I believe. If actually we do even without Hala, but I think Hala will be here soon. So I'll just say calling the AHRA to order at 3:42 p.m. And whenever you would like me to begin that presentation, Andy, I'm happy to share my screen and do that and make it very brief here.
Okay, I think that we need to at least ask each member.
Sure.
Just to acknowledge that we can hear them. So if we need to talk to later participation, that we know we're set.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Dr. Shabazz, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yes, I can see everyone and I can hear you.
Okay, Irv, Dr. Rhodes, you're muted.
I can hear everyone and I can see everyone.
Okay, great. And Alexis.
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Okay, and Yvonne was going to try to join us. Hala, if you can hear us, you've been sent an invitation to join as a panelist, so you'll just have to accept that in order to be moved into the room. All right. You want me to go ahead, Andy, with the?
Yes, please, because I think that's where we were going to go next, is you were gonna.
Okay. So hopefully, can you see my screen here, everyone? Yeah, okay. All right, so I did email this over earlier today, and you'll see there are a couple things highlighted here. Those were just additions that came out of the AHRA meeting from 2 p.m. today. But everything else is the same as what I've emailed. And before I go through this, I just wanted to really thank the AHRA and the Finance Committee and the counselors in our first discussion of this at the Town Council. Also the staff for providing input and feedback and recommendations. And as I said in the email, we believe that this reflects a significant and meaningful commitment by the town, as well as takes into consideration many of the concerns that we've heard as we've been discussing this. So we begin here with a base appropriation modeled from the FY21 actual cannabis tax revenue. And we ask that the policy grow a fund to $2 million, so expire when the appropriation has reached $2 million. We are taking into consideration feedback that we received about the coming 3 years, have asked that we model the appropriation from cannabis tax revenue and do it through certified free cash for FY23, 24, and 25. And then beginning in FY26, when we're understanding that DEI and CRES and the 4 firefighters will be more stable and worked into the budget, we're asking for that to shift to a designation of cannabis tax revenue. We have in here that there would be an annual review by the Finance Committee during the drafting of the budget policy guidelines. The policy procedures would, of course, be in accordance with MGL and our charter here in Amherst. The possible use of funds really isn't meant to be a part of any action today, it's more just to give a sense of what the possible use of funds will be once the reparative justice plan is developed fully. And these come from the National Coalition of Blacks Reparations in America. Many of us here went to a symposium, I think it's back 2 years ago, that Reparations for Amherst put on with Cam Howard as a panelist. Cam is the chair of NCOBRA of the National Foundation. And these are possibilities. Of course, there'd be a consultative process with members of the Black community. But again, this is not really relevant for any action today. And then we say that the full plan and eligibility criteria will be recommended by the AHRA per our charge in the final report, which is due in June 2023. And of course, would need to be approved by the town council. So I'm going to stop my share, or would it be, Andy, would it be best to leave this up, or should I stop my share? Recommend.
We can leave it up for a moment and then
Okay.
See, because I think that the next point before is whether there are members of the Finance Committee who have questions that they would like to pose to Michelle about what she's presented. And I see Kathy's hand is up. So Kathy.
Thank you, Michelle. And I want to start out saying, in terms of a concept, I totally support reparations, but I also think for initiatives on a large scale to be effective require federal and state action. And we've done a show of local support in what we've done when we set up a reserve fund, which now has $200,000 of money in it. We've provided seed money. So my thinking on this right now is, you said this could come later in terms of what we might do with it. I think it has to come first, that a plan for who we think might be eligible for what you've characterized as direct and material benefits, who might be eligible, because I think we're going to have some challenges in trying to think it through. And I have a bunch of questions that I'd be happy to send in to you. So I'm assuming African-American heritage would be one of the first determinants of eligibility. So I don't know whether we thought of, is it mixed race would qualify, what kind of race basis and what would be eligible, and what, is there any documentation, is genealogy, oral history? Would the heritage have to date back some amount of time? So for example, would Barack Obama, who had a father from Kenya, qualify? So would it have to go back in time? Would we have students, college students at Amherst College, and a fairly high percent of the African Americans who currently live in Amherst are students? Would they be eligible, any of them at UMass, at Amherst or Hampshire, to apply for a direct benefit? Would Amherst residency for any length of time be required? So these are, and I have a couple other questions. Would wealth and income matter at all? Current wealth and income for direct benefits. And I'm not asking you to have answers to them right now, but I think these are the types of direct material benefits, which is what I thought the fund would be mainly for. So to get housing assistance, to get business loans, any of the things you have listed. And to me, waiting for that report to June 2023 is the right approach before we commit additional money into a fund. We've got seed money. And if there are, other activities like the community benefits, we just had an amazing weekend with a volunteer effort supported by staff with Black history and larger issues. I think there's a lot starting to happen in the town of Amherst, and there may be federal and foundation grants to do more. So just focusing on what type of activities might be supported by this, and in a fundraising effort, we can certainly enhance it. So I start with wanting to know that before I would want to put more money into a fund. And I thought seeding the fund was the right way to start, and then giving people time to think about the legal questions as well, enabling us. I don't want to build up money that we can't then spend. So that's my overall take. And I will say it's the fiscal hawk side of me where I'm looking at a really tight budget every single year going forward, not just through 2026. And I'm concerned that the commitment we've met to addressing systemic racism through an alternative to police, through efforts that we would like to support after-school activities, making sure people who can't pay get funds, all of that requires that we maintain a flow of revenue. We don't tie up, we don't pre-allocate revenues. We need to have flexibility. So that gets to the cannabis question, but I'm much more focused on what Andy asks, who and what criteria might be eligible for this fund, even if it only had $200,000 in it. So that's the questions, and I have written them out, so I'm happy to send them in.
May I respond to that, Andy?
Yes, I was just about to say, just for, so I know how to manage. I'm recognizing you, of course, but don't hesitate, Michelle, during the course of the conversation as the presenter, to raise your hand just so I know that you want to make a response, but please go ahead, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kathy. I think that everything that you've just outlined are really important considerations. In fact, at the tail end of our conversation in the AHRA today, we touched on eligibility. And these are matters that the committee has been charged with studying and evaluating. So eligibility, looking at what the harms were and really getting a focused lens on the harms that are particular to the Amherst community, and then being able to determine who is eligible based off of that, as well as determining through a consultative process with members of the Black community what sorts of reparative justice initiatives the Black residents in Amherst would like to see. But in order to do that work, it's very important that we understand what the money commitment is. For us to go out and to begin a process of consulting with members of the Black community without having an idea of what our budget is, essentially, what we have to work with. And also when we're talking about eligibility, it's really important that we understand before we start delving into those areas, what sort of budget we have to work with. And then if we just look at the timeline that we have, if we were to wait until June 2023, when we've completed all of our recommendations with respect to eligibility and with respect to the reparative justice initiatives that the Black community would like to see, we would be out of time given the way that our budget cycle and that our budget process works. That being said, if there's a commitment that's being made now, and the money is beginning to get set aside now, all of those factors are still going to be in play. All of those, whether, there's the legal opinion that we're going to need to seek, they're going to have to be legally, we're going to have to be able to legally direct the benefits out, whether they're direct or community benefits. And so the money isn't going out. We're just asking to put the money in, and we're asking to understand what budget we have, what commitment is the town making within their means at this time, so that we can start going out into the Black community, or to speaking to members of the Black community and going through a process of consulting the Black community. And also, as I said, really understanding what harms. So for example, we know in Amherst that we have racial covenants in our deeds, and they're not legally permissible, but they're still in our deeds. And so we need to be able to look at those harms and see who they impacted. And all of that work's going to be done, but we can't wait until June 2023. And then with what committee, with what, we've been charged with identifying a funding stream. And so that's what we're doing. And we feel we've made a really solid case, and a compromise here that we feel, as I said, is a significant contribution, a significant and meaningful contribution, as well as taking into consideration the health of our finances at this time.
Okay. Looking right now still to members of the committee, the finance committee, to see if there are other questions or comments. And then after that, I'm going to see if there are any members of the AHRA who want to speak. The other thing I'm going to notice is that for any members of the public who were, whether you were here before or not, the prior public comment was listed solely to the CPA proposal, which we addressed as our first action item regarding the track and field at the high school. And we were reserving public comment on this agenda item until we began the topic of discussion. So there is another public comment period coming first. Are there any other members of the committee? And maybe we should try and stick to this now or not, but Bob, go ahead.
Michelle, can you just clarify what you mean by appropriations that come from certified free cash in FY 23, 24, and 25? If there is no free cash, what's your expectation?
I think that's a really great question, Bob. And that's the risk we take here. In our mind, and I don't want to, I will speak on behalf of the HRA, but of course, welcome their comments as well. In our mind, we're trying to negotiate a deal here. And what I heard from Sean and staff is that, and maybe again, don't want to speak for anybody, is that the comfort level right now with respect to this and modeling this is that using the cannabis tax revenue as a model, taking it from free cash for the next few years is the best way to approach this, given DEI, CRESS, the 4 firefighters. I don't know what the backup plan is if there's no money in free cash. But looking at the reserves right now, looking at the stabilization fund right now, I'm not sure what others think about whether that's something to be overly concerned with. And I did see Sean's hand shut up, so maybe he has something to add to what I said there.
It's okay if I hop in, Andy?
Sean.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, Bob. So, we haven't had a ton of time with this document, but what I've seen so far is that it, sort of sets the parameters of a funding plan for reparations. It's something that other people have talked about. We have funding plans for lots of different things. We have funding plans for OPEB and for capital and our pension system and our operating budgets. And so we have funding plans for lots of things that the town funds. And so this seems to set the framework of that. And so the nice thing about those plans is that in any given year, you don't have to follow them. You let the circumstances of that year sort of dictate, and you may catch up later. So a good example is with OPEB. There were a couple of years where we hit some tough times with the pandemic. And so we reduced our contribution to OPEB for a couple of years. Things turned around and we were able to make up that sort of underfunding for those couple of years and catch it back up. So again, I don't know exactly how this would work, but if we view this as sort of a funding plan, if there was a year where we didn't have free cash, maybe that year there's no contribution made. If there's no free cash because there was something really catastrophic that happened, I mean, that would be something major if we had no free cash. But I think what we do is that year, I like the part in the plan that says annual review by finance committee during the drafting of the budget policy guidelines. That tells me that each year we can look at the circumstances that are going on in that particular year and make an informed decision. So I think that's how I would approach it, is if that was the case, that year there would be no contribution, and then we would look to catch up in a following year when things get back to where we want them to be.
I think
I don't know quite how to frame this, but I've just been looking at what we're going to be needing to ask taxpayers for this new school that we just took a big step forward, and it's going to be a big ask. So if I had to anchor free cash in something, I would anchor it into a fund for the school. I'm just, and it's this sense I have of competing needs and pre-committing funds. And when you said, Michelle, you need the money before you can figure out what you're going to do with it, I need a much better sense of what we might be able to do with it before I can consider what the right amount of money is. I just don't work from, give me a large amount of money and I can do a lot with it. I really think having a firmer piece, and I had understood when we did the first allocation that there would be a year, and we're a year from now, where we would have more specificity, and this clearly is moving in that direction. So I have a discomfort, but I can understand that, as Sean just said, with OPEB, when we make a decision that we're not putting money into it in advance, but to start to pre-commit for multiple years in the time period we're in right now, really causes me a lot of discomfort with this, including the extremely large ideas that are under community benefits, I think these are really big projects that need statewide efforts. When we're talking about new history monuments and new textbooks, I think these are terrific ideas, but I think we are Amherst. I don't think we have to step beyond where we think we can go, a multi-townish effort, a statewide effort, absolutely. And I think there's some foundations that are going to be willing to step up to these kinds of efforts. So I really do start with some of the direct benefits. And you said, reparations. Would you have had to live in Amherst and be harmed? So these are just questions I have on this that I still don't have answers to, because I do know you did an excellent research report that documented the kinds of things that had happened in the town of Amherst. But if someone has recently moved here, 10 years ago moved here, and didn't directly experience those. So it's that level of what are we talking about on the people that still makes me feel like before I can think about funding, I want to know more about the eligibility. So I'll stop there because I do like the idea that if we don't have free cash, we don't contribute. And if we have very tight free cash, we might be sequestering it in the stabilization fund. Having discretion to make those decisions is what I'm asking about as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. I'm going to recognize Lynn, and then I'm going to take a pause from the committee and welcome comments from a couple members of the AHRA who've been seeking recognition. I just wanted to assure them that I do see hands up, but this is largely I wanted to be Finance Committee, and so Lynn.
Actually, Andy, I would like to, after hearing from members from the AHRA, I would like to suggest a path forward, but let's hear from members of the AHRA first.
Yeah, and I might say, Lynn, that there are other issues. I have one in particular that I want to be able to raise. Other members of the committee might have other issues that they want to raise. So before we get to the path forward too much, you have to judge the timing for that. But if there's no objection, I certainly would like to be able to allocate a few minutes to each member of the AHRA who wants to comment on the discussion that's happened. And I'll start with Irv. And Irv, I assume, I know that at the AHRA meeting that I was just at, you referred to as Dr. Rhodes, and if that's your preference, I certainly will go from here. We have a first name tradition at the Finance Committee. So, but go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you. I mean, it's in the AHRA, I'm referred to as Dr. Rhodes and Irv simultaneously. And every other committee meeting, I'm referred to as Irv Rhodes. I answer to both of them, and it really doesn't really matter. It is not of a concern to me. What I would like to say is that in terms of free cash, I think Sean was right. If the town finds itself where it doesn't have free cash, then we will immediately congratulate Sean and Paul, give them huge raises, and put them out as a model to the rest of the Commonwealth. That's not going to happen. So the other thing is the whole thing about waiting until we as AHRA have defined who is going to be eligible and how they're going to be eligible, et cetera, before money is committed. It sounds good, but it seems to me that when you concretize a promise, then you have said to people in the community, especially to the AHRA, the Black community, that you have committed yourself to doing this. And, you know, African Americans, people of color, poor people have always been made promises. And those promises, when the bill comes due, the money is not there. It's better to say for us and for me, if I'm going to make a promise to my kids in the future that they're going to have a college education, then I'm going to put money aside now, not when they graduate from high school, so that they know it is there. And I have made my promise and I've concretized that promise. So I'm saying the same thing to the town. Make it concrete. Make it something that the community can understand that the town is behind. And given the protections that are already built into this plan, then if we do not meet those kinds of criteria that are set up, the money still can be redirected at that point. Or even at the point where we have all the money in there, or the process by way this money gets in there, if the town enters into a situation that requires that year the money will not be set aside for that purpose, then it isn't. And Sean pointed out what has happened at OPED. So to me, make your promise concrete, something that we can take forward to our communities to say, hey, the town has really committed itself to this, and that the town has put forward a funding mechanism, which we were charged with finding a funding mechanism. I want to make sure that everyone understands that part of our charge was to identify the funding mechanism. All right, and we have identified a funding mechanism. So to me, yes, you know, Kathy, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But on the other hand, what I'm saying is, hey, you know, if you're going to make a promise, make it a promise that you can stand back up and that I can see that you really, really mean your promise.
Thank you, Irv. Alexis, you had your hand up before and then have not taken it down. So I'm going to assume that you don't wish to be recognized any further. Okay, your hand is up again, so I do recognize. Please join us. And
thank you very much. I wasn't going to say it, and then you inspired me to say it again. So I think that one thing that got brought up was very important. And when we talk about, days of commemoration or celebration or even monuments, at the end of the day, we're talking about symbols. And I think that we really need to come back to the main mission, right? Our intended impact when we're talking about repairing, a relationship between an institution and a demographic of people, right? So I just want to remind us all that we are, taking steps to change systems that we can acknowledge harm people. So it's an institutional change, right? An institutional commitment that needs to be made in order to even start to change the institution. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
good, thank you. So turning back to the committee, I'm going to recognize Alicia before I turn the subject a little bit, but Alicia, please.
Thank you. I just have a quick question probably for Sean. I was wondering if we have an average amount of free cash, like in general, that we have every year, and if there has ever been a time where we turn out with none.
Sonia may want to speak to if we've ever had none. Our policy is generally 5%, and then anything above 5%. So 5% of the budget, and then anything above 5% goes to our stabilization fund. So we're usually at least at around that 5% mark. That being said, sometimes the council appropriates from that during the year and takes some out if there's an emergency. So there could be a year where there may be some sort of emergency where there's an appropriation during the year that reduces it below that 5% level. But Sonia she'll have much better historical context of that. Do you want to
I
add
don't
something?
have, yeah. I don't have it in front of me, but there's never been a time when we didn't have free cash. However, there were times when free cash was very minimal, like maybe tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands or millions. So budgets are
Thank
getting
you.
tighter. So a lot of returns from the operating budget are going to become less and less. So you want to keep that in mind. And we're budgeting most of our revenues and local receipts. It's not as conservative as we've done in the past. So that might shrink it up as well.
Thank you, Sonia. And just a clarifying question. So have we ever had a time where we didn't meet the 5% in the free cash on those years where free cash was limited?
Yes. There were multiple times that we didn't meet that 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Richard's question reminded me of one of the two things that I was going to say when I got to my comments, and I'll start with it since we're down this path. I don't have it before me, but this policy is a longstanding policy of the town dating back. I'm trying to even think of the year, so I'm not going to venture. I guess I was going to say around 2007, roughly. And it's available on the town website. It's called the Financial Policies and Indicators. When you look under the budget section for the FY23 budget and then the other information, I think that the policy is in there. And the reason I point that out is that when that policy was written, since I was on the committee that developed the policy, I therefore have some familiarity with how it came about. The reason for the policy in some sections was included sort of as a way of kind of, if you're familiar with the legislative process, a statement of legislative history. And so that when you look under the section on reserves, on free cash and stabilization funds, the intended purpose of the policies is stated in that document. It has been stated in that document since it was written. I think that it's instructive because going to the stabilization fund side is what it does say, of course, is that free cash has a purpose, and but that it can be met if we reach that 5% threshold, and that therefore amounts above 5% should be transferred to stabilization funds. The stabilization funds were set up in order to address two purposes. One was to be able to assist with capital projects, and the other was that in periods of substantial financial stress in the town, that it sort of functions as a savings account, and the ability for the governing body, whether it be town meeting before or town council now, to be able to have the stabilization fund so that it can continue the essential services of the town and move forward. And having been in the unfortunate experience of being on the old finance committee in 2009 and 2010, the first years after the 2008 recession, it was crucial that we had a significant stabilization fund for those purposes. You know, our schools, our municipal services, our libraries all relied on our ability to use that stabilization fund for that very purpose. And the action that we took last year was first time we really have, and this was a council decision, of course, which it should and did make, was to broaden purposes of stabilization to serve this other purpose that we're talking about today. So I just wanted to put that out for context to history. The other topic that I wanted to just mention is that as you talk about the years in the presentation that we looked at for Michelle, I spent some time last week doing sort of a analysis of future year budgets, and it was not a lot of fun to do it, both because it's not, you know, I can think of much better thing, more entertaining things to do. But, you know, I was looking at the questions year by year of where we were and what was coming forward in both trying to project out inflation and trying to project out how to keep our commitments that we have already made as a town. And those commitments come in various forms. One is to maintain the ongoing services, which are very important to our community, including our schools and our library. But it has a very, you know, it covers a lot of things. But also, we have now made commitments to setting up a new town department in public safety, and we have made a commitment to hire 4 additional firefighters. And as noted, they're funded for a period of time through ARPA, but I think that FY25 is the end on when we can use ARPA funds. And so I was looking into years ahead, and what I was finding is that the real problem years that I was seeing are FY 27, 28, 29. When I looked at those years, because I was trying to go out 5 years, I was having problems because I kept coming up, no matter how I went about doing it, unless I severely shrunk something, that the deficit was running over $1 million. That's a serious number. On the other hand, I recognize there are limits of my capacity to do that kind of analysis. So when I put forward the suggestion of what else we need to ask, I think one of the things that the Finance Committee needs to decide whether or not it's important is to ask Sean and Sonia, with Paul's consent, to help us model those out years to make sure that I'm right or I'm wrong in my analysis. So that, and I think, and part of the analysis is also built on my knowledge of the capital projects, because I did include thinking about the capital projects as I did that model. And one of the things with capital projects, and Kathy's probably would be pained if she had to speak on this yet again, but costs have gone up from where we projected originally, and therefore the model that had been used and developed a year and more ago is not really therefore a model that we can count on, not only of construction costs going up, but borrowing costs have been going up, and borrowing costs are also a significant part of the model. So I was trying to factor in all of these things, but the bottom line of it was still that painful conclusion that I just reported to you. So since we are a Finance Committee, you know, I would suggest that the Finance Committee think about whether it wants to ask staff to go back on that. And the last thing I want to say on that is that in the budget book, there is a 5-year projection, and I did start from the 5-year projection, but we also have to recognize that the 5-year projection was probably developed during April. Sean can tell us when it was developed if he wishes, but since it was published on May 2nd, we can guess that I can throw in an April date. There's been a lot that has happened since April in the economy. Inflation has skyrocketed. We are now seeing interest rates going up in huge fashion, and we're being threatened with the possibility of yet another recession. So all of those things are out there. I think that all of that causes me some anxiety about planning and commitments. Michelle, your hand is up, and I'm finished.
Yeah, and I think that I just want to acknowledge what you said, Andy, and that, I think we're all taking a bit of a leap of faith here, given all the various factors that we've been talking about and the challenges that we have ahead. But we made a commitment, and we need to put ourselves behind that commitment, because honestly, and I mean this with no disrespect, but when I hear all of the various things that continue to circularly come up in these discussions that we have, I hear Black people don't matter. That's really truly what I hear. And I know you don't mean it that way. And Kath, I see that, you shaking your head, and I really understand that that's not what you're trying to say, but that's what I hear. We made a commitment to redress harms that this town is responsible for. And we need to stand behind the commitment we made, and all of these other things will work themselves out. We're not talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about what I believe is a very reasonable proposal that we've put forward that takes into consideration all of these things, that has all sorts of checks and balances. And we don't talk about other things, other services in this town in the same way that we talk about reparations. Black people matter. We've made the commitment. Now let's put ourselves behind it.
Let me just say two things, because it was a part of my analysis and thinking and doing this. I'm gonna have to turn this phone off. One is that when I did my analysis, I was making sure that I was protecting commitments where we already have expenditures. So the CREST program, for example, was one. But another one that I thought about was the schools. And I wanted to make sure that as I was trying to figure out, I wanted to treat the schools as an important part of what we do, because I recognize that ultimately education is what gives all of our community, white and BIPOC, the ability to move forward. So I did think about that. But now I want to turn back to the committee, and so I'm going to go to Alicia and then Lynn. Alicia?
Thank you, Andy. So I just wanted to echo all of Michelle's sentiments and just re-emphasize that the town has committed. We have a resolution committing to focusing on ending structural racism and achieving racial equity for Black residents in Amherst. I know that we have done a lot of work this year in terms of establishing the CREST department and the DEI department, but those are not enough. Those are just the very beginning of some of the steps that we should be taking as a town. And so this is an initiative that the town council committed to, and we created the AHRA for this exact reason, to establish a revenue, a funding source for this purpose. And so it is frustrating that now we're seeming hesitant. And some of the reasons are that, our fiscal, that we're going to be tight in fiscal years 27, 28, 29. I think whether we do or do not commit to this, we're going to have a tight budget for those years. And nonetheless, the commitment that we made to this still stands. The commitment that we made to ending structural racism and achieving racial equity still stands. So if we do nothing, we are failing to follow through on our commitments. So taking that initiative forward today and making a more specific commitment is how we continue to push these things forward. Things like the school budget and other things that are also very important, they're not linked to the commitment to addressing structural racism, not specifically. And so I think we need to just remove those from this conversation because all of these things need to be funded. It's not this is more important than that. And so I think we need to figure out in what way are we going to commit to this because that is what the question is here.
Okay. It's just, Linda, do you have anything? Otherwise, I'm going to get to Kathy.
Yeah, I'm ready to try a motion, but if you want to.
I think we need to keep this going. Plus, I'm not sure that just give it a little bit longer if we can. And then I also want to honor my commitment to recognize public comment. Kathy?
I'll just make a quick thing because I think we've made a huge commitment as a town. The CREST program is, in my mind, restorative justice. It's trying to end and do and looking forward in a very creative way. And it's over $1 million. And I mean, this is not a small investment for the town of Amherst to set up a program like this. Our schools, having focused on who's in our schools, are more than half minority kids. We are a huge commitment in education to this town, and we need to keep it going. So I just think we need to have the big picture in mind. We've got DEI just got set up. The town is doing extraordinary efforts to populate committees with people who haven't always been heard, to do voices. So I think we shouldn't underestimate what this town has committed to in an extremely short amount of time. So I just want to say, this is one program. I'm not, and so what I was saying, and Irv asked a good question, of what budget might make the work possible going forward. And I'm just not sure quite which kinds of eligibility criteria. That's an important piece for me to figuring out how much budget might be needed. And the big issues on the list, I think probably can't come out of this fund. So that discussion would be a good one to have, but I just want to correct the record for saying that we're not making a commitment on racism and structural racism, including reparative justice. If we can treat mental health and drug abuse in a very different way, where people don't have criminal records, that we're helping people, which is what I think our CREST program is going to be trying to do. We are looking forward to removing stigma from people who couldn't get jobs before because they had one run-in over possession of a drug. And I think we have a new group that's coming in that's going to make a real difference. And I'm hoping we see it. So I just want to rise to the challenge of saying we aren't committing. We have committed and we are committing. So I will lower my hand, and I don't usually try to get on a soapbox, but I was challenged, so I had to respond.
Alicia?
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so I think that it's a little, this conversation is really challenging. So I appreciate everyone's contributions, but I think that although the schools serve a diverse group and have a lot of minority students, investing in a new building is very much needed, is not investing in things like trauma-informed care supports or investing in adequate representation in educators. Those are very, very specific ways, or like textbooks as indicated by the AHRA. Those are more specific ways that we can address racial equity and trying to mitigate the effects of structural racism. And I just want to re-emphasize very, very strongly, while I am so excited about the CREST and the DEI department, they are not enough. That is not enough. We are talking about remedying hundreds of years of oppression and racism and harm done to residents. And 2 small programs that are just barely getting off the ground right now is not enough. And so I think that in order to solidify our commitment and to prove to our residents that we are still equally committed to this resolution as we were last year, that it's continuing to move these initiatives forward and not just saying, well, we're going to stop and wait here.
Okay, thank you. Let me just take a look for a second. Okay, I think what I want to do is we are getting past 4:30, so we do want to set a time limit. But I do want to give both Irv and Amilcar a few minutes because they've been very patient. And Irv?
2 things. Andy, in terms of your model, did I hear that you were looking at your model would produce a $1 million deficit? Is that correct?
My model would, but that's why I was suggesting that it needs to be tested by the professionals. But yes, and I was not counting in additions to stabilization funds, so that if we are committed to $200,000 for this stabilization fund for reparations, that would make the deficit 1.2 million under that calculation.
All right, so as I understand it, the reserve fund is above $23 million, if I'm not correct. And that's going to be there, and it obviously can be added to. So it's above $23 million. I can't remember the last time I looked at it. So that's one thing to remember. The other thing is that what we are looking at when we look at it in terms of real dollars, the present $200,000 saying cannabis funds, if it were then modeled to be put into the stabilization fund for AHRA, that's less than 0.25% of the entire budget. Less than 0.25%. So when I hear people talking about this being some kind of threat to the budget, it sort of stuns me, because if 0.25% is a threat to the budget moving forward, then we certainly have a huge, huge fiscal problem in this town.
Just to make one point, and then I want to call it Amilcar in response to what you just said, and that is that the stabilization fund, one of the things that we want to do is sometime soon get an explanation made for the Finance Committee as to what it is, that how the stabilization fund fits into the building projects, because it was designed, the reason that we deliberately set aside that large of a stabilization fund was to assist with the building projects. And it's a very important element to it, because if we don't use it strategically, we not only don't have an even payment method, but we have to ask for even a larger tax exclusion override. And maybe I'll see if Sean has more to say on that subject.
I don't have much more to say on that. I think I was just going to sort of add to what Irv said, which, I don't think we have a fiscal problem, but I think we have a large fiscal challenge. I think the council has, town manager, the town itself has decided it wants to fund CRESS, it wants to fund DEI. We wanted to fund additional firefighters, and we want to fund 4 new building projects. in a relatively short period of time, in addition to the climate resiliency action plan and reparations. So I think when you add all those things together over a span of 5 to 10 years, that does create some real large fiscal challenges, I'll say. So I realize that 200,000, it seems small relative to the context of our budget, but when you start adding up the additional things that we're trying to fund within that budget, I think you start to see sort of why it is so challenging. Is because there's a lot that we're trying to do.
Thank you, Amilcar. Are you muted?
I'm here now. It's been great to be on this African Heritage Reparations Assembly with Irv Rhodes, Dr. Irv Rhodes. I've always wished we could have been on the school committee together. I wish the vote had gone a little differently and we would have both been on there. We probably could have really moved Amherst forward into the 21st century if we had been on there together. Everything he said is all to the point. The one other thing I would just say, which is where you all's deliberation has been really concerning to me. You know, Andy, the money's gonna be there. If you know, I already feel like we've compromised so much. We backed away from saying, let's earmark cannabis. All right, you know, I was beaten down in the assembly on that, and Alexis and I and whatnot. We were beaten down on it. So we compromised. We got this thing we're doing now with you, and you're fighting that. Come on, folks. You know, the money is gonna be there. It'll be there in the stabilization fund, whatever you squirrel away. And if conditions are different, if it's like, oh, Crest can't move forward, there's no money, or DEI officer is gonna leave if she doesn't get some, the fund is there. Just check in with whatever the successor body is to the African Heritage Reparations Assembly, is all I'd say, is check in and say, hey, we, the council, think we got a crisis here and we need to dip in to that. Let's say it built up to 750,000. We're going to dip into that 750,000 to do this. Maybe the successor body completely agrees because it makes a, and maybe they don't, but you still have the power. The money is there. The only piece here is what my chair has said already, and your fellow counselor, Michelle Miller, has said already. It's showing the commitment that we matter and that the harms are clearly recognized, the historical structural racism, the ongoing, and that you're going to have some ongoing commitment that this is something to work with. Once we have this picture, we can go full steam in consulting with the community, bringing forth more specific proposals, getting them legally tested the way Evanston did. So again, it's not like this hasn't been done. It's been done. And yes, we will get our specific proposals to all see that they pass legal muster. So, you know, I have no doubt, but we do need this support. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Amilcar. Just real quick ask is, are there any members of the public who are attendees in the meeting who would like to be recognized for public comment at this point? I think I have one hand up from Meg Gage. Athena, can you bring Meg in so that we can hear from her, and then we'll go on. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Now?
Yes.
Okay. I thank you very much. This is a really important discussion. I agree with Kathy. It makes me really nervous to say that because of the idea that that means I don't value people of color. I think we should try to have this conversation without assigning motives or appearances to things that we say, because we're having this is a substantial, important discussion that crosses several levels, both finance and what I wanted to talk mostly about is strategy, as well as town politics. So not repeating what Kathy said, I want to raise two additional points. that relate to strategy. The first one is that reparations is an attempt to correct hundreds of years of violent racism growing out of slavery. And many people, including myself and Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen, who just wrote this fantastic book last year, think it has to be done at the federal level if we're going to do, and it's in the range of $88 billion. And there are efforts at the federal level to make this, it'll take a long time, but to make this happen. And I think I know Dr. Shabazz has had the same conversations with Dr. Darity as I have. I know we don't agree on this, but I have been convinced that local efforts, if they don't also talk about the national need for reparations and racial justice solutions at the national level, aren't going to in the end be meaningful. And if they don't talk about it, they could in fact undermine it, because people could think, well, we did it in Amherst, we don't have to do it, you know, in Topeka, Kansas, or Biloxi, Mississippi. The second strategy concern I have is that while I understand the idea that you can't have a program if you don't know how much money you have. First of all, a lot of us have done things with no money, and then the money comes because of the ideas of what we have. But more behind that is, I don't understand what the strategy is in Amherst. So, for example, the mention was made about housing discrimination. So that means a person of color who comes here from another country will suffer from discrimination because they're a person of color. If that's what we're trying to do, which was a really important thing to do, then instead of talking about reparations, this should be the Racial Justice Committee, or the dismantling structural racism committee. And then it would make a lot more sense, because there are things in Amherst that we could do that would address that. Otherwise it doesn't. So there are two strategy questions I don't understand. Is this really reparations, and how can you do it if it's not at the federal level? And the second is, what is the strategy in Amherst? You know, is it housing? Is it helping kids in school? I just would like to know more about what it is, so that we can have a discussion about whether this is the right strategy or not. I mean, this is, I could say, I've been doing so much of this for so many years in Amherst. There's a lot more to say, and it's not, I'm just a person in the public, so I'll stop. But just add one thing, is that I'm on the League of Women Voters Racial Justice Committee, and we're bringing Sandy Darity and Kristen Mullen to do a webinar in December or January, and we're organizing a book reading group, hoping to work with the library to organize a chance for people to read at least parts of the book before the webinar, and we can have that discussion about with them here.
Well,
thank you for the chance to speak, and I was sort of anxious about taking this position. My friend, Dr. Irv isn't there anymore. I don't know him anyway, but I think I trust that we can have these discussions without judging each other as, you know, whether or not we have integrity, but just these are points of view. Over.
I'm going to, there's one more person from the public who's asked to be recognized for public comment. And then I'm going to, at this point, we're getting on to towards the end of the meeting, and I need to call Lynn, who's been very patient and wanting to make a motion. Lauren?
Yes, hi. Yes, hi. I just wanted to briefly state that I too, as a public person and resident, am a little frustrated. And, you know, my mother had a saying when, you know, I was growing up, that beggars can't be choosy, but I just don't feel like the AHRA or any other Black-led reparatory organization should have to come every year to the town council to ask for monies. I think it would be easier for both those entities and the town council to, as was said, make a commitment and set aside whatever percentage it can to reparatory efforts, restorative justice efforts, so that this difficult conversation about money doesn't have to keep occurring every year. And also, the ARPA funds are federal funds, but I would argue that they don't necessarily reach the people who most need it all the time, because again, the structures in the town, and it's not unique to Amherst, are set in institutions that have not always, met the needs of people of color. It's just how it is. And there's always more we can do, but to always say that, or say that, we're not comfortable or we're not ready to make a financial commitment, I think is disheartening. And, other areas such as Springfield, they had a week-long Juneteenth. And, sometimes comparisons are helpful and sometimes they're not, but, what the town is doing is great. But the last thing I'll say is the new school budget, which I understand is $105 million, that is a large amount. And did it have to be $105 million? No, but that's what you guys committed to and what you voted on. And so I'm just saying that, communities of color, they don't want to always be in the purse strings of the town. We want to grow a fund that we can draw on ourselves, instead of, like, again, having these difficult financial conversations every year about reparatory efforts in the Black community and communities of color.
Well, thank you. I'm going to recognize one more public comment, and then I'm going to need to get back to concluding the next step in our meeting. But Brianna Owens has also been having her hand up. So Brianna.
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to urge folks to stop using CRESS as a checkbox for our commitment to ending white supremacy. Safety for residents who identify as BIPOC cannot be the bar for restorative justice. It really should be the bare minimum. And I just want to say, I believe it's really important for Black voices to be at the forefront of what is needed and what funds should be used for.
Okay. Thank you. Lynn?
I'd like to make a motion. I'm seeking a second so that I can then speak to my motion. The motion is the following: that the Finance Committee recommends that the Town Council each year, upon the certification of free cash by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in October, and upon the review and recommendation by the town's Finance Committee based on the town's overall fiscal health at that time, that the Town Council add an amount equal to the certified cannabis tax revenue for the previous year in approximately July, to the stabilization fund established for the purpose of reparations until such time as the fund equals $1 million.
I second that motion.
Okay, I'm prepared to put that on the screen. And then I would like to speak to it. So I have to just say, I have spent a lot of time this week, last week, and even the weeks before, trying to figure out, given all of the many machinations of fiscal, state, and local rules, how to get something forward that's in the spirit of what the council has said in the past, but at the same time maintains the flexibility that I personally believe we need by not earmarking, and by making sure that our town is fiscally healthy. I share many of the concerns that have been voiced here. I also share many of the concerns that have been, many of the pleas that have been voiced here as well. If you do look at our budget book from just this past year, the year that we just approved this budget in, you see a budget that projects, in fact, a deficit. You know, anything projected forward is still make-believe. It's not final. But at the same time, as we go into the certification of free cash, because of the fact that that budget was put together in March, came forward to us in the beginning of May, we are hearing about inflation. We're hearing about possible other fiscal problems. This motion is an attempt to honor, but set it in the context of the fiscal reality of where we may be. It also is an attempt to give the AHRA and their future committees or whatever they recommend at least a dollar amount to start thinking about. I'm not saying it can't be added to. In fact, I have very strong suggestions as somebody who's worked a lot with nonprofits about how to structure some of the funding that they're looking at. But it also allows the town manager to include cannabis revenue in the development of the budget each year. But we do end up with free cash. And if we pass this motion, then I would also like to reconsider and withdraw the motion that we approved, that we voted on last time, because first of all, I think it's somewhat sloppy. And second of all, this would take care of this year and the years going forward up to 1 million. That's all I need to say.
Okay, Michelle and then Kathy.
I'm actually going to suggest an amendment to this. So if Kathy would like to go first, I'm good with that.
I have one question. I support this motion. I have one question, and I also support rescinding the motion we took last week or whenever we took it. So am I reading this? It says add an amount equal to, it doesn't have, but before that it has on review and recommendation. So as an example, if certification of free cash was $250,000, a small amount, would we add an amount equal to the cannabis tax revenue if it equaled that? So does this tie our hands to a specific amount, or is it flexible enough to not do what, you have to come every year and ask for money. So it's saying this is the stream. So Lynn, it's just as you thought about writing it, because it's got two sentences in it, and how would they work together is my question.
Right. And I, this was written after listening to everybody. And if we ended up with a really small amount of free cash, I want to just say I am totally and completely respectful of what Irv has said today, what Amakar has said today, and everyone else. When we're in serious trouble, then we work together to come out of it.
Okay.
But if we're not in serious trouble, and we have taken care of making sure the budget we just passed in June is still balanced, and we've made sure that we're still moving forward on our big and small capital projects, including improving roads and sidewalks. Yes, it gives you that flexibility, but it makes sure that every year we return to this, that we return to it with a benchmark, both of what we're looking for in cash to move, and it gives us a maximum level, which could be raised in the future.
Then I'm comfortable with the wording then.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you, Lynn, for this. Very much appreciate it. And also the words that you spoke. I would like to amend this to reflect what the AHRA has put forward. And at the last line, reparations until such time as the fund equals 2 million is my amendment. And I, of course, would need a second for that.
I second that.
Okay, there's a motion that's been made and seconded. I'm going to speak to your motion, and then I see Sean's hand up too.
Yeah, thank you. Two short points. One, and I know we are not Evanston, but just for comparison's sake, Evanston set aside $10 million. Their budget is 4 times ours. And then my second point is I did a lot of number crunching around this, especially looking at it from an endowment perspective, which is, I think, something that we've talked about and that Sean talked about initially when we were setting this up. And so if we're thinking about an endowment of 4%, for example, we're talking about very little money in the first years of this. But when we're talking about $1 million to 2 million, we're talking about the difference between 40K and 80K a year to work on these reparative initiatives that come forward. So while I feel that 1 million is a solid commitment, I feel that 2 million is the right commitment. It is a very, very meaningful commitment. And if we do consider this in the light of an endowment, it will give us much more flexibility to pursue the types of initiatives that I know the residents of the Black residents in the community would like to pursue.
Sean?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about this from a staff perspective in terms of what this actually, taking this motion, what it means. So I assume each year we would still have to bring an order, staff would still have to bring an order forward. And that order would still have to go to Finance Committee and be considered and then be brought back. So again, I just want to maybe clarify what this action is, and does the town manager have a role in this? Is this guidance to the town manager, or is this not involving the town manager? I guess those are my 2 questions from a staff perspective.
I feel it is guidance to not only the town manager and staff, but it's guidance to the council. And the guidance also includes and relies on the town manager and you, Sean, as our director of finance, to lay out where you think we stand with regard to our fiscal health at the time we're looking at free cash. But it would require every year, just like we did last year, a couple different financial orders that move money one way and move other money another way and move money into whatever. So yes, it requires a yearly action.
Okay, I think as long as we make it clear that this is not a financial order, this is
right.
Yeah.
That is my clarity on it. Okay.
Can I just
Kathy,
ask
go
a point?
ahead.
I just asked, there's been a proposed amendment. Do we first vote on the proposed amendment?
Yes.
And then we go back to the original if the proposed amendment fails? Is that what we would do? Okay.
So I think what we want to do is see if there's any more discussion on the motion. So seeing no further requests for discussion on the motion, I think we're ready to move forward on a vote on the motion. And the motion is a motion to amend to substitute 2 million for 1 million. And I hate to put my resident members in some alphabetical question, but Bob Hegner.
Sean has his hand up, Andy.
Sorry. Well, if it's okay to still ask a clarifying question.
Yes.
So again, just to clarify, is this motion recommending that we transfer from free cash? I know it talks about that in the beginning, but it doesn't actually say to transfer from free cash to the stabilization fund. It just says add to the stabilization fund, which maybe is the intent for it to be flexible in that way, where it
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily have to be a transfer from free cash, but I just wanted to clarify that.
It was the intent that it would be transferred at the time we certify free cash. So therefore, I assume that amount we certify is the free cash, right?
Right. I'm just at the
That was
bottom
the
where it
intent.
says add an amount. I don't know if you wanted to say to transfer an amount from free cash equal to the certified, because add to the stabilization fund we could do in other ways potentially.
Can I say something?
Yep.
You can't have a financial order without a dollar amount in there. So you can vote this order the way you have it, but it doesn't commit us to moving money from free cash. We would have to have a financial order that would come forward to the council that you would have to vote once we have the money certified. So we can't say a fictitious amount that we don't know what it is. The DOR would not even accept that for us to do that. Us
So
have a specific dollar amount.
Right. So let me play out this year's scenario. Okay. This year in October, along with having the certified free cash, there would be a financial order to transfer the amount equal to the cannabis revenue, which I think is somewhere around 200,000 and something, from the free cash that was certified to this stabilization fund for reparations. That's, in my mind, how this plays out.
Okay.
Does that work, Sonia? You're the financial experts. I'm just trying to.
I think we understand the intent. If it wasn't us, I just want to make clear that other people understand the intent.
Yeah, from this order, we could not just go ahead and move it from free cash. We would have to bring a real financial order with a real dollar amount and a real funding source.
And that would
to council. And I just want
would,
everybody to understand that this doesn't say to us, move it automatically.
No, this means you have to bring it to us as we look at free cash and make all of those motions.
Okay.
In October.
Okay. It would require it anyway, wouldn't it? Because it would say, since it says at the beginning, recommends that the town council each year upon certification. I mean, it can only happen with the town council action.
Okay. Matt Holloway has his hand up.
Hi, thank you very much, Andy and Michelle and the entire group. I'm really grateful for this, and I think this is incredibly important. I have to admit I'm struggling with this quite a bit. I guess for two reasons. One is that I think this is to me sort of infers or indicates that the entire cannabis tax revenue for the town of Amherst should be dedicated to the reparations, which I think is a slightly different message than I heard last time. And I am a little bit concerned that our current cannabis program doesn't have any minority or diversity or equity participants in any way in terms of vendors. So I guess, and I gather that there's probably more study to be done around that cannabis revenue stream, but it's not, I guess I haven't been totally persuaded that the entire cannabis stream should be dedicated to reparations. And I realize that that's kind of implied within this order, that it's not explicit, but I just have to say that does seem to be a pretty strong implication here, especially, based on the previous vote, which I agree was a little slippery. And then I think the other thing is that, this does, sort of to Sean and Sonia's points, this does feel like a policy recommendation and something that's going to lead to annual sort of debate. So I don't know if debate's the right word, but it's going to be a challenge annually to make this review and recommendation, and for the town council to, then make that addition to the budget. So on some level, I guess I would feel that the council should make a policy decision on this, as opposed to being a finance committee issue specifically. And And then I guess my final point is it does come back to me to a lot of the questions that Kathy raised at the outset, which is, to whom are these funds being directed and for what purposes, and I totally respect the need for having some money to be able to appropriate towards that. I think I know there is, the seed money available. And I guess as a finance committee member and as a relatively new resident member, I would feel more comfortable if I knew what it was that I was funding when a financial decision came before us. And I certainly recognize the historicity of this moment and the historical implications of this work. But I want to voice my discomfort here. And then, especially knowing, I guess, that the resident members will be called to vote on first. I wanted to get that out there because I may, it may be hard for me to come out in support of this, to be totally honest.
Andy, could I clarify something?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So the stabilization fund is just a bank account that we're putting the money in. In order to spend any of that money, another order would have to be put together for the purpose that we're spending it. And there would be debate and it would be a 2/3 vote for it to be spent on that. So the concerns about what it's being spent on would really kind of happen at that point.
Right.
I just want to clarify that.
I think that there's, when we started the meeting, I said we may not come to a conclusion today. And there's additional information that we might want to obtain. There are a couple of things that I had thought about that did not arise during the discussion so far, and I'm going to just mention what they are, because ultimately it's up to a voting member of the committee to move to postpone consideration until next meeting, which you'd only do if you feel that additional information is essential. And therefore, it's not a motion I'm making. I'm just pointing out that it's an available motion. One thing is that we've talked about this being an endowment. It's been recognized as an endowment, and the amount of money that would be available depends upon how much money is generated. But we are not the Jones Library trustees and a separate organization. And as the town, we have limitations on what we can do in investment of town funds. We've had absolutely zero discussion about what those investment options are for the town and what can be brought forward in projected revenue from those sources. So I think that that's one thing that's kind of just been assumed away in the discussion without any additional discussion about it. And the other, which was alluded to a little bit, but hasn't been really substantially discussed either, is whether there's any information becoming available about cannabis revenue, because there's certain factors out there that I can think of that might increase cannabis revenue, but there's also a large number of factors that I think indicate a decrease in cannabis revenue. It's really a foggy amount, and people feel comfortable knowing that it could go up or could go down to have this. And it's partly for our own discussion, but partly because I think we owe it to the council, since this is a recommendation, to take something to the council to make sure that the council is fully informed. But having said that, I think we're back on the floor for discussion and a vote on only the motion to add to the $1 million to make it $2 million at the very end of the motion. That's the motion that's on the floor. So when I'm calling for a vote, it's not on any of these other issues right now. It's whether to change the 1 million to 2 million. And is there any final discussion on the change of the amount? So seeing none, I'll go ahead and I
I
can
mean,
tell you.
Michelle's got her hand up.
Oh, Michelle.
Yeah, I apologize. I think that Alicia may have lost connection and is planning to be back. So I know that complicates things in this moment, but
No, thank you for pointing that out. That's important.
yeah.
Because we don't want to deprive the voting member of an opportunity to participate in the vote. And
It's my understanding she'll be back very shortly, but I don't know.
Athena, do you know anything as to whether she's going to be able to get back?
I haven't heard from her, but as chair, you can pause the discussion while we wait for her to reconnect.
Okay. Because the other person who's absent from the meeting today, and I feel badly about that, is Bernie Kubiak. But and I've let it go forward without Bernie, but I do feel uncomfortable about letting it go forward if we can't get Alicia back.
I believe, will be back shortly. Andy, if you're willing to just wait a few minutes, I do believe she'll be back shortly.
So let's change to a different topic entirely. I'm going to put aside the discussion, the votes on the motions that are on the floor, just for a housekeeping measure. And that is that you should be getting a poll, I think through Athena is where we have it right now, for possible dates for a finance committee meeting for July. And if this discussion ends up having to be continued because Alicia comes back, that's what the plan would be. Secondly, I think we were going to, at that point, Sean has his hand up, but we were hoping that Sean would be able to give a fresh explanation of what the current plan is for financing 4 major building projects at the same time. Sean?
Sorry, I'm going to be in Alaska that day, so I won't be able to. No, just kidding. No, I was just going to check in, Andy. I know we've got quite a few minutes that we have to, unless I don't know if we're approving them offline or not, but we did get a request for some minutes. So maybe at the next meeting, we could try to get a bunch of the minutes approved.
Yeah, and I may need to actually call on members of the committee to help, because we found that there was a problem with the last set of minutes that I looked at, and then didn't catch an error on, and nor did anyone else, which was that I said that there had been no vote taken on the North Common project, and there was. And this is not meant as a reflection on the person who's taking minutes, who is working very hard, but things get missed by the best of people. And it's important that we make sure that members of the committee, some member of the committee, looks over the minutes and just does a double check on the minutes, even if it means reviewing key points of the YouTube of the discussion. Lynn?
Andy, I would like to ask that you as chair divide the minutes up among those of us on the committee that were in attendance at those meetings and on the committee, because some may go back even further, and that we individually take the responsibility of reviewing them and trying to bring them back for approval on the 18th. I do think this is a serious concern, and I'd like all the members of the committee, and even Bob as a non-voting member is shaking his head. Yes, maybe he'll do some too. That we all take some responsibility for some of these and we try to bring them back and get them done.
Thank you. I can work with Athena because she probably can, she has the minutes, she hasn't sent them to me, which is, but that has to happen. And then she can also work with me to know what's available. Michelle? Okay, still
I think
waiting.
we should just go ahead and.
Oh, Alicia's back.
Where? I don't see she's in the audience. Bring her in.
The audience is the problem.
There she is.
Okay, Alicia, please confirm that you're here.
I am. Thank you all so much. Sorry about that.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is a motion to amend Lynn's motion that would change the number at the bottom that the ultimate goal is $2 million, replacing the words $1 million in the motion. You now see it on the screen. We've had substantial discussion on it. We were only waiting to vote until you were back in the room. And what I'm going to do is I think go ahead and start with stay with the alphabetical, but I'm going to skip down a few and then go alphabetical from there, so I don't put the burden that was on our resident members to go first. So with that, Michelle.
Yes.
Kathy.
No.
I'm gonna say no. Alicia.
Yes.
Lynn.
Oh, I am unmuted. No.
And I want to hear from Bob.
I support the 2 million.
And Matt.
I don't support.
So the motion, the vote that has come out right now is we had 2 yes, 3 no from the voting members, 1 support, 1 non-support from the resident members, and 1 member absent, a resident member. So it remains as $1 million. Therefore, back to the motion on the floor. And I don't think that, unless I see hands up, I think we're ready to vote on it. And I'm going to start with
Kathy has her hand up.
Kathy, you have your hand.
Okay, I hate to prolong this, and I would be more comfortable with an amount up to the certified, because it's committing us to a specific dollar amount. But given how long that other one just took, its amount up to, so it would be an amendment. And am I proposing this? I don't know whether there's a second. I think we had a really long meeting. Yeah. That's the way I would word it.
Kathy, can I ask for a clarification? That's an amount up to rather than equal to the certified cannabis tax revenue. Is that correct? Is that what you meant?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Is there a second?
Can I just ask Kathy a question? I don't understand what the differentiation is. Could you help me understand this, Kath?
Equal means exactly whatever the cannabis tax was. Up to means it could be something less.
Up to the certified cannabis. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So it would have to, the amount would have to be decided, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, you would you have a cap on it, and the notion of that we're building up a fund to equal $1 million, I would leave just as it is. So I don't even know whether there's a second to this, how long it just took it to do the first part, but that would make me more comfortable.
Is there a second? Seeing no second. I think we
Then
have-
fine. Then we can vote on the motion. I'm fine. I'll give up.
Okay, so I'm going to start with votes, and I'm going to just move down one in the alphabet and start with Kathy.
Can you just come back to me? I think I'm going to abstain. I abstain.
Okay, I was going to come back to you, but
No, I can make a decision.
okay, I'm going to vote yes. Alicia,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Bob,
I support.
Matt,
I support.
okay, and Bernie is absent, and Michelle.
Yes.
So that carries with, I think we had 4 yeses, 1 abstain from the voting members, 1 support, 1 non-support from the resident members, and 1 resident member absent.
Both
So-
residents support.
Both residents supported, Andy.
Yes.
So it's turning out to yes.
4 in favor, 1 abstention, 2 residents. in
No,
support.
Kathy just changed her vote.
Oh. And Kathy, what was it?
No, I didn't change my vote, Andy. I just said the 2 residents both supported. You said
Oh, I'm
one.
sorry.
You said
Okay,
one
so-
supported, and one didn't.
Okay,
but
so
both
it is 4-0 with 1 abstention in the voting members and 2 support from the
Correct.
resident members. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's what the record will reflect. So with that, I have no other business to report. We will let you know the date for the next meeting. And I think unless there's another request for an unanticipated item, I think we can adjourn.
The only question I have, Andy, is Lynn's, she had a linked one of rescinding the vote we took last time.
Oh,
Thank you.
By doing this, did we just rescind the other?
no, let's take.
No, we have to
vote.
officially rescind. So I would like to move for reconsideration, the vote taken on the previous vote taken on
What was
June 7th,
Yes.
it was
June
7th.
7th, and have it struck and rescind that motion.
For the sake of time.
Shane seconds.
For the sake of time, I will allow 2 motions to be combined, 2 actions to be combined as a single motion. And I will start with myself on this one with the yes. Alicia,
I'm sorry, Andy, to hold things up, but it was the motion to recommend the town council ask the town manager to direct the staff to prepare an order.
yes.
That's the one.
Moving cash, okay, I just wanted to make sure that we're talking about the right thing. So I'm going to include that in the motion. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So back to you, Alicia. This is merely to allow us to rescind the last motion that was made at the previous meeting, since this replaces it. Alicia?
I'm sorry, Andy, can I ask that you read the motion?
The current motion on the floor is to reconsider and rescind the vote taken on June 7. That the finance committee recommend that the town council ask the town manager to direct the staff to prepare an order to transfer an amount of free cash to a stabilization fund in the actual amount of the FY22 cannabis tax receipts.
And Alicia, the reason to rescind is because this motion already takes care of it. The motion we just passed.
The new motion, yeah.
The new motion takes care of this.
So the new motion, though, is saying that each year we will do it. It's a little bit different, but it essentially, the outcome is the same, is what you're saying.
It does.
Because this one, the one that was passed at the last meeting only encompassed the current year. And this one encompasses the current year and future years.
Okay, so we will still have something in place for this current year by voting to rescind this motion. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Okay, Lynn,
Yes.
Bob,
I support.
Matt,
Support.
Bernie is absent, Michelle,
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that.
Andy, how do you vote?
Yes, I vote yes. And we started with Alicia.
Bob?
So
No, I supported. I
he
already.
had already, but we went
already-
alphabetically.
He managed to get
It was
it. He
the
got
stop
everyone.
point. Okay, so we have heard from everybody and who's present.
Unanimous.
And it's 4 yes, or 5 yes, I'm sorry. And both support from the 2 present resident members and not 1 absence from a resident member. So with that, back to where we were before, I think we have no further business. I've seen no hands up requesting further business. So we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.